In the remote mountains of Montana, where mist clings to ancient pines and isolation breeds independence, armored SUVs cut through dawn's silence. Los Zetas cartel soldiers emerge with military precision, weapons raised toward the weathered cabin. That holds their latest acquisition target. Fatal miscalculation. Behind those unassuming log walls lives a ghost from America's darkest operations, a former Tier 1 operator whose name still makes hardened generals whisper. For 20 years, he eliminated threats that never existed in official records. As boots crush wildflowers and rifle scopes seek targets, they believe they're launching an assault. The truth is far deadlier. They've just entered a kill box meticulously, prepared by a man who turned asymmetric warfare into an art form. What follows isn't a firefight but a demonstration of why some predators retire not from weakness, but to escape what they've become. The commander of the strike team signals with practiced hand movement. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. The commander of the strike team signals with practiced hand movements. 6 men branch left, another 6 right. 4 à main. With vehicles, weapons trained on the cabin's weathered door. The morning air carries the metallic click of safeties disengaging. Inside the cabin, a coffee mug sits untouched on a hand-carved table. Steam still rises from the dark liquid. The tactical radio crackles. Eagle 1 in position. Eagle 2, ready. The commander raises his fist, then drops it sharply. Breach in 3, 2. A lone meadowlark calls from somewhere in the pines. Then another answers, except it's not a bird. The first explosion rocks the clearing, sending the leftmost SUV cartwheeling into the air, a twisted mass of burning metal. Before the shockwave settles, precision rifle fire erupts from 3 separate positions, each shot finding its mark with devastating efficiency. The cartel soldiers, elite in their own right, scatter for cover that doesn't exist. This wasn't an ambush. It was an execution. From a ridge half a mile away, through the scope of a custom-built rifle, a single eye watches. It doesn't blink. Michael Reeves knelt beside the fresh soil, calloused fingers pressing a young pine sapling into the earth. With surprising gentleness, sweat beaded on his weathered face despite the morning chill. This marked the 78th tree he'd planted this season, one for each life he'd officially taken. The unofficial count would require a forest. "You're up early again," said a voice behind him. Michael didn't startle. He'd heard Sarah's footsteps 30 yards back, recognized her gait among the whispers of nature that most would never notice. His shoulders relaxed slightly, the only visible sign that he registered her presence at all. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, patting the soil around the base of the sapling. Sarah Quinn, the local veterinarian who owned the property adjoining his, had become his closest connection to humanity over the 3 years since he'd established his sanctuary here. She approached with 2 steaming mugs, herod hair catching the early sunlight as it tumbled past her shoulders. "Nightmares again?" she asked, handing him a mug. Michael accepted it without meeting her eyes. His silence was answer enough. "You should talk to someone, Mike. It doesn't have to be me, but I appreciate the coffee, Doc." His voice was soft, but firm. Closing the door on further conversation, Sarah sighed, but didn't push. She'd learned the boundaries of this strange friendship. Michael Reeves had appeared in Whitefish Valley 3 winters ago, paying cash for 200 acres of remote woodland and the dilapidated cabin that came with it. He kept to himself, but he wasn't unfriendly, just contained, like something pressurized, something dangerous. The locals had their theories. Ex-military was the obvious guess, given his bearing and the efficient economy of his movements. Some whispered darker possibilities after witnessing how he'd incapacitated 3 drunk tourists who'd hassled the waitress at the Pineview diner. The movement had been too fast to follow, the precision terrifying. The men left town with broken wrists and a story no one would believe. "I'm heading into town for supplies," Sarah said, changing the subject. "Need anything?" Michael shook his head, then reconsidered. "Actually, some more of that local honey would be good." "The one from the Miller farm?" "Sure thing." His phone vibrated in his pocket. Michael tensed. Only 3 people had this number, and none of them called without good reason. He placed the mug on a nearby stump and pulled out the device, checking the caller ID. Daniel Mercer, his former handler. "I should take this," Michael said, already moving toward the cabin. Sarah nodded, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. "I'll stop by later with the honey." Michael waited until she was out of earshot before answering. "I'm retired, Dan." "I know," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "And I wish this was a social call." "Then why isn't it?" Michael entered his cabin, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The interior belied the rustic exterior. State-of-the-art security monitors displayed feeds from cameras hidden throughout his property. A weapons cache was concealed behind a false wall. The hardwood floors concealed pressure sensors that would alert him to any uninvited presence. "We've got a problem," Mercer said. "Remember Cardenas?" Michael's jaw tightened. Felipe Cardenas, second in command of the Los Zetas cartel. 6 years ago, Michael had led the classified operation that killed Cardenas's brother and dismantled their Pacific Northwest distribution network. "What about him?" "He's found you." The words landed like stones in still water. Michael moved to the window, scanning the tree line with newly alert eyes. "How?" His voice was deadly calm. "Someone talked. Someone who knew about Montana. Few people had that information. Very few." "How much time do I have?" Mercer's pause said everything. "Not long. We've intercepted communications. They're coming. With force, Mike. You need to disappear again." Michael watched an eagle soar above the pines. Disappear. Run. Hide. The cycle he thought he'd finally broken. "No," he said softly. "Not this time. Mike. I've run enough, Dan. This is my home now. Then let me send a team. We can set up a perimeter. Coordinate with local." "No." The word was final. "No teams. No agencies. No collateral damage in my town. You can't handle this alone. Not even you. These aren't street thugs. Cardenas has militarized his security detail. Ex-special forces from 3 countries. Michael's gaze drifted to the photo on his mantle. The only personal item displayed in the cabin. 3 men in desert camo, arms around each other's shoulders, faces half hidden by tactical gear. 2 were dead now. "I won't be alone," Michael said. "I'll call you when it's done." He ended the call before Mercer could protest further. For several minutes, he stood motionless, processing, planning. The calm that settled over him was familiar. The cold clarity that had kept him alive through 2 decades of impossible missions. He moved to a leather-bound book on the shelf and removed a small key hidden in its spine. The key opened a hidden floor safe beneath the rug. Inside lay a satellite phone and a worn notebook. Michael dialed a number he'd memorized years ago, never expecting to use again. It rang 3 times before connecting. No greeting came from the other end. Just patient silence. "It's Reaper," Michael said, using a call sign he'd abandoned years ago. "I'm calling in that marker." A pause, then a gruff voice replied. "When and where?" "Montana. Tomorrow." "Who's the target?" Michael looked out at his peaceful homestead, at the sapling he'd just planted. "Not who, just me. I need to disappear one last ghost." The man on the other end understood the code. "See you tomorrow, Reaper." Michael ended the call and reached deeper into the safe, past stacks of cash and multiple passports, until his fingers found cold metal. The custom M1911 pistol had been a gift from his father, the only gift the hard man had ever given him. "So much for retirement," he whispered to himself as he checked the weapon with practiced hands. Outside, the trees swayed in the mountain breeze, oblivious to the violence that would soon shatter their peace. The black SUV arrived just after sunset, navigating the winding mountain road with unhurried confidence. Michael watched through his thermal scope as it approached, the heat signature of the engine blooming bright against the cooling landscape. He'd spent the day preparing, converting his sanctuary into a fortress. Subtle tripwires surrounded the perimeter. Pressure plates now lay dormant beneath innocent-looking patches of earth. He'd cached weapons and supplies at strategic points throughout his property. The cabin itself was rigged to become either a bunker or a death trap, depending on who controlled it. The vehicle stopped at his gate. A single figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who knew how to navigate hostile territory. Michael lowered his rifle. He recognized that movement pattern. 5 minutes later, he opened his door to the only man he'd ever truly trusted with his life. Jackson. He extended his hand. Leon Jackson's grip was firm, his dark eyes scanning Michael's face for changes 3 years had brought. "You look soft, Reaper," he said, with a hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you look old." The tension broke. The men embraced briefly, the gesture awkward but genuine. Inside, Michael poured 2 fingers of whiskey into glass tumblers, while Jackson studied the tactical displays. "Nice setup for a retired man," Jackson observed. "Some habits die hard, like the habit of making enemies who don't forget." Jackson accepted the whiskey, but didn't drink. "Tell me what we're dealing with." Michael pulled up satellite imagery on his laptop. "Felipe Cardenas. His brother was collateral damage in Operation Diamondback. I was team lead. The Panama insertion. I remember the fallout." Jackson nodded. "But why now?" "That was 6 years ago. Because I got sloppy." Michael's jaw tightened. I stayed in one place too long. Made connections. Jackson's gaze was knowing. The redhead next door? Michael didn't answer, which was answer enough. So what's the play? We fortify and wait. Or we take the fight to them? Neither. Michael moved to a topographical map on the wall. We set the terms of engagement. Force them to come through here. He pointed to a narrow pass between two ridges. And we make them regret it. Jackson studied the map, then looked at his old friend with new concern. This isn't a military operation, Mike. This is personal for Cardenas. He won't follow your script. He will if we give him the right motivation. Which is, Michael pulled up a file on his laptop. These are intercepted communications from Mercer. Cardenas isn't just coming for me. He's planning to establish a new distribution hub in this region. My elimination is convenient, but secondary to his expansion. And how does that help us? Because we're going to leak information suggesting I have evidence that could destroy his entire operation. Data drives, names, locations. He'll need to secure those before eliminating me. Jackson frowned. Do you actually have anything like that? No, but he doesn't know that. A knock at the door froze both men. Michael's hand moved to his sidearm as he checked the security monitor. Sarah, he muttered, tension visible in his shoulders. Jackson raised an eyebrow. The neighbor? Stay. Here. Michael moved to the door, composing his features into a neutral expression before opening it. Sarah stood on the porch, a small jar of honey in her hands. Her smile faltered slightly at Michael's rigid posture. Bad time? She asked. Just busy. With an old friend. Michael stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Thanks for this. He took the honey jar, desperately wishing she would leave. Sarah glanced at the SUV parked nearby. Military buddy? Something like that. She studied his face, reading the tension there. Everything okay, Mike? Fine. Just catching up. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She'd become too good at reading him. You know, for an ex-soldier, you're a terrible liar. His stomach tightened. This was precisely the connection he couldn't afford. Someone who saw through his defenses. Sarah, I appreciate the honey, but the distant sound of an engine interrupted him. Both turned toward the road, where headlights appeared around Thabend. Michael's instincts flared. Wrong timing. No scheduled deliveries. Unknown vehicle. Get inside, he said, his voice suddenly hard. What? Why? Now. He gripped her arm, guiding her forcefully toward the door. The approaching vehicle was a nondescript sedan, exactly the kind used by cartel scouts. Ordinary enough to blend in, powerful enough to escape if needed. The cabin door opened. Behind them, Jackson appeared, rifle in hand. Sarah's eyes widened at the weapon. Michael, what the hell is going on? The sedan slowed as it approached the property. Inside, Michael repeated, practically pushing Sarah through the doorway. To Jackson, he murmured, secure her. I'll handle this. As the door closed behind them, Michael walked calmly toward the gate, one hand behind his back, gripping his M1911. The sedan stopped, the driver's window lowered. The man behind the wheel was young, Hispanic, with the dead eyes of someone who'd seen too much violence too early. Can I help you? Michael called out, his posture relaxed, but ready. Looking for the Quinn property, the man replied with a slight accent. I was told it's around here. A casual observer might believe the story. Michael wasn't casual. About 2 miles back, you took the wrong fork, he said pleasantly. Head back, stay left at the fallen pine. The man nodded his thanks. His eyes flickered once to the cabin, then back to Michael. The assessment wasn't subtle enough. As the sedan reversed and turned around, Michael memorized the license plate. Once it disappeared around the bend, he pulled out his phone and called Mercer. They're here, he said without preamble. First scout just did a drive-by. How long? Mercer asked. 24 hours. Maybe less. Mike, reconsider. I can have a team? No. Michael's gaze drifted to his cabin, where Sarah was undoubtedly demanding answers. But I need something else. A secure location, off-grid, for a civilian. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. The neighbor. Yes, Mercer sighed. There's a safe house near Kalispell. I'll text you the details. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. Just survive this, Reaper. Michael ended the call and stared at the empty road. The inciting incident had begun. Now the only question was how bloody the climax would be. Absolutely not. Sarah's voice reverberated through the cabin's wooden walls. Michael stood across from her, arms folded, expression impassive. Jackson had positioned himself by the window, tactfully pretending to focus on surveillance rather than the heated exchange. It's not a request, Michael said quietly. It's happening. Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. You don't get to decide that for me. This is my home too, and it's about to become a war zone. Michael's voice remained steady, but an edge had crept in. These aren't people you reason with, Sarah. They're cartel enforcers. They kill witnesses as routinely as checking the time. Her face paled slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. So explain to me why they're coming for you in the first place. What did you do to them? Michael glanced at Jackson, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug. Your call. I was part of a classified operation that disrupted their organization and killed the brother of a high-ranking member. He delivered the information clinically. Now he's found me, and he's coming for revenge. Sarah stared at him, processing. So you weren't just military. What were you? Special forces? CIA? Something like that. Her laugh was bitter. Still keeping secrets, even now. Michael moved closer, dropping his voice. The less you know, the safer you are. I've arranged a secure location. Jackson will take you there tonight. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. Then you become a liability that compromises this entire operation. I can't protect you and deal with them simultaneously. The words struck like physical blows. Sarah stepped back, hurt visible in her eyes before anger replaced it. A liability. That's all I am to you. She grabbed her jacket from the chair. Fine, I'll go. Not for you, for myself. Because clearly, I've been fooling myself about what exists between us. Michael didn't contradict her. Better she leave angry than stay and die. Jackson approached as Sarah stormed into the bedroom to pack essentials. Cold, he commented quietly, but effective. Just get her to the safe house, Michael replied, and then get back here before dawn. Jackson studied his old friend. You're really going to face this alone if I don't make it back in time, aren't you? I survived Kandahar alone. Barely. Jackson checked his watch. We need to move soon. That scout will report back and they'll establish a perimeter. Michael nodded, moving to his tactical setup. I've mapped 7 possible approaches. Most likely they'll come in stages. Reconnaissance teams first, then the main force. Numbers? Mercer's intelligence suggests between 15 and 20 operators. Probably Venezuelan and Mexican special forces washouts. Jackson whistled softly. Not great odds. We've had worse. Sarah emerged with a small duffel bag, her face composed but eyes cold. I'm ready. Michael reached for a burner phone on the counter. Take this. It has 1 number programmed. Mine. 4 emergencies only. No social calls, no texts. She took it, without meeting his eyes. How long? 3 days. Maybe 4. She nodded stiffly. And if you don't contact me after that? The unspoken question hung in the air. What if you don't survive? Mercer will handle your extraction from the safe house. You'll be taken anywhere you want to go. A moment of silence stretched between them. Years of unspoken feelings compressed into a farewell neither wanted to say. Be careful, she finally murmured. Always am. Jackson led her toward the SUV, tactical rifle hidden beneath a blanket in the back seat. Michael watched from the doorway, a cold emptiness spreading in his chest as the vehicle disappeared down the darkened road. He closed the door and returned to his preparations. The first piece was in motion. Sarah would be safe. Now he could focus on survival. Dawn broke with mist clinging to the pines. Michael had worked through the night, sleeping in 20-minute increments. A habit from his operational days. The perimeter was now rigged with surveillance equipment tied to motion sensors. Weapons caches were established at strategic fallback positions. He'd just finished burying the last of the remote detonated charges when his satellite phone vibrated. Speak, he answered, voice low. Package delivered, Jackson reported. Returning to your position. ETA 3 hours. Negative. There's been a change in timeline. Michael scanned the tree line as he spoke. Drone surveillance picked up vehicle. Movement on the logging roads. At least 3 groups approaching from different angles. A beat of silence. They're moving faster than expected. They found something that spooked them. I need you to divert to position Charlie and establish sniper coverage. Are you sure? That leaves you without close support. I'll manage. Get to Charlie and prepare for my signal. Michael ended the call and moved back toward the cabin, staying within the tree cover. His instincts had been right. The cartel was accelerating their timetable. Something had triggered their response. Inside, he activated the monitors displaying feeds from his hidden cameras. Nothing yet, but they were coming. He could feel it in the stillness of the forest. The absence of birdsong. His satellite phone buzzed again. Mercer, we've got a problem, his former handler said without preamble. The information leak worked too well. Cardenas isn't just sending foot soldiers. He's coming personally. Michael froze. Confirmed. Multiple sources. His private jet landed in Spokane 2 hours ago. He's mobilized his entire security detail. This changed everything. Felipe Cardenas never exposed himself to direct risk unless the stakes were astronomically high. He's bringing something with him, Michael surmised. Something valuable enough to risk exposure. Our analysts think it might be money. A lot of it. The kind of cash needed to establish a new distribution network. Or buy off local officials, Michael added. If I could capture that. No. Mercer's tone was sharp. Your mission is survival, not interdiction. This isn't an operation. Michael's jaw tightened. It is now. Damn it, Reeves. You're not authorized. I haven't been authorized for anything in 3 years. Michael checked his weapons. Tell your superiors that if they want Cardenas and his money, they should be prepared to offer me something in return. Like what? Complete removal from all watch lists, new identity, and protection for Sarah Quinn. A long pause. I'll see what I can do. Michael ended the call and resumed his preparations with renewed purpose. What had started as self-defense was evolving into something more complex. If he could capture Cardenas alive, along with evidence of a major smuggling operation, he'd have leverage. As he loaded magazines with practiced efficiency, a small red dot appeared on one of his monitors. Motion detected at the perimeter. The first scouts had arrived. Game on. They came in pairs, moving with professional caution through the underbrush. Michael tracked them through his thermal scope. 4 men total, approaching from different angles, maintaining proper intervals for minimal exposure. He remained motionless in his concealed position 50 yards from the cabin. Let them think the building was the target. Let them focus their attention there while he observed their tactics and equipment. The lead pair reached the first tripwire. One noticed it, gesturing to his partner to move around. Good. They weren't amateurs. This would require precision. Michael pressed the transmitter in his palm twice. 2 clicks in Jackson's earpiece, signaling, I have eyes on. Hold position. The scouts converged on the cabin, using hand signals to coordinate their approach. 2 covered, while 2 advanced. Standard CQB procedure. They'd been trained properly. Through his scope, Michael could see their weapons, H&K submachine guns with suppressors, body armor under lightweight tactical vests, earpieces for communication. 1 of them reached the cabin's porch, testing the door. Finding it unlocked, he exchanged glances with his partner. Too easy. A potential trap. After a brief conference, one removed a small object from his vest. A fiber optic camera. He slipped it under the door, checking for tripwires or pressure plates. Michael allowed himself a small smile. They were being careful, thorough, but they were looking for conventional traps. He pressed a button on the detonator in his left hand. No explosion came. Instead, the cabin's lights flickered once, then died. Inside, unseen by the scouts, a hydraulic system activated, sealing reinforced shutters over the windows and barricading the main door with a steel plate. The scouts reacted immediately, backing. Away from the cabin, weapons raised. One touched his earpiece, reporting the development. Now they were concerned, scanning the surroundings with new urgency. This was no longer a simple reconnaissance. The target knew they were here. Michael watched them retreat toward the tree line, moving with greater speed now, professional discipline momentarily compromised by surprise. He could eliminate them easily, from this position. 4 shots, 4 bodies. But that would reveal his capability in position too early. Better to let them report back. Let the cartel force commit more resources based on incomplete information. He waited until they disappeared from view, then changed positions, moving silently through the underbrush to his next observation post. The first phase was complete. The enemy had revealed their approach vector and operational discipline. Now he would let them stew, let uncertainty work on their nerves. His satellite phone vibrated. Jackson, I'm in position at Charlie, his friend reported. I count 2 more teams approaching from the north and east, 6 men each. Weapons? Military grade. Assault rifles, body armor, tactical gear. These aren't street thugs. Cardenas? No visual yet. But there's a blacked-out suburban holding position on the logging road. Heavy security around it. Michael processed. This. He's waiting for confirmation before exposing himself. What's the play? Michael checked his watch. The scouts would be reporting back now, describing the cabin's unexpected defenses. They'd assume he was barricaded inside, perhaps with automated security systems. They'd prepare for a siege or a frontal assault on a fixed position. Maintain surveillance, he instructed. Let them deploy fully before we engage. I want to identify all players before we start dropping bodies. Copy that. Going silent. Michael tucked the phone away and settled deeper into his camouflaged position. The real test would come soon. The cartel forces would establish a perimeter, then probe his defenses systematically. They'd expect him to be reactive, defensive. They wouldn't expect him to hunt them. Night was falling now, casting long shadows through the pines. Michael adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his weapons one final time. The temperature was dropping with the sun, creating ideal conditions for thermal detection. This terrain, this situation, it was familiar territory for him. For nearly 20 years, he'd specialized in asymmetric warfare against superior numbers. One man against many, using the environment and psychological pressure as weapons. His satellite phone buzzed again. This time, a text message from Mercer. Deal approved at highest levels. Deliver Cardenas, plus evidence. Receive full package, including Quinn protection. Good hunting, Reaper. Michael's expression hardened. Hunting it would be. The night had deepened when Michael's thermal scope detected movement. A lone figure approaching from the southwest, using the terrain for concealment. The movement pattern was distinctive, controlled, professional. Jackson. Michael lowered his rifle slightly, watching his friend navigate the killing field with impressive stealth. Jackson had made good time from his observation post, likely responding to the increased cartel activity. Michael activated his throat mic. Northwest position, 20 yards from the lightning-struck pine. Jackson adjusted course immediately, finding Michael's concealed location within minutes. Situation? Jackson whispered, as he settled into position beside Michael. 3 teams deployed, 12 men total, plus the 4 scouts. They're establishing a perimeter for first light assault. Jackson pulled out a small tablet, displaying thermal imagery captured from his previous position. There's something else. Cardenas brought more than security. Look, the tablet showed the blacked-out Suburban. Beside it stood 4 figures. One appeared to be Cardenas himself, based on his stance and the deference shown by the others. But it was the 4th figure that caught Michael's attention. Smaller, restrained between 2 guards. A hostage. Michael zoomed in. But the resolution was too poor for identification. Leverage, most likely. Jackson tucked the tablet away. They must have realized you're not alone. Michael's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. How would they know about Jackson? Did anyone follow you from Charlie position? Negative. I maintained proper counter-surveillance protocol. Michael nodded, but unease nagged at him. We need to identify that hostage before we proceed. Jackson checked his watch. Dawn's in 3 hours. Their assault will begin shortly after. They'll probe the cabin first. When they find it empty, they'll expand their search. Michael studied the terrain through his scope. We need to circle back, get closer to that Suburban. I'll take point, Jackson offered, already preparing to move. Michael grabbed his arm. No, we move together, a precaution he wouldn't normally take with Jackson. But that nagging feeling wouldn't subside. They traversed the forest with practiced silence, using the patrol patterns they'd observed to time their movements. The cartel forces were good, but predictable, maintaining standard intervals, checking lines of sight at regular intervals. As they approached the logging road where the Suburban was parked, Michael signaled for a halt. Something had changed. The vehicle's position had shifted slightly, and the security pattern had tightened. They're preparing to move, he whispered. Jackson nodded. We need to see that hostage now. They crept closer, using a shallow drainage ditch for cover. The Suburban's rear door was open, interior light spilling onto the dirt road. 2 guards stood nearby, rifles at the ready. Michael adjusted his scope for maximum magnification, focusing on the vehicle's interior. His blood froze. Red hair, pale skin, a face he knew better than his own. Sarah. No, he breathed, the word barely audible. Jackson tensed beside him. What is it? They have Sarah. Michael's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. The safe house was compromised. Impossible, Jackson muttered. I followed all protocols. No one could have. Michael turned to his friend, a terrible suspicion forming. Did you call anyone after dropping her off? Jackson's expression remained neutral. Too neutral. Just the confirmation to you. No one else? Not even to report success? Michael's hand moved imperceptibly toward his sidearm. Faint smile touched Jackson's lips. You always were too perceptive for your own good. The betrayal hung between them for one suspended moment. Then both men moved simultaneously. Michael rolled left as Jackson's knife slashed where his throat had been. He came up in a crouch, weapon drawn, only to find Jackson already aiming at him. Don't, Jackson warned. One shot brings them all down on us. Why? Michael kept his voice even, though rage pounded in his veins. 3 million reasons. Jackson's aim didn't waver. Cardenas pays well for betrayal. You sold me out for money. The disgust in Michael's voice was palpable. Don't act surprised. We've both seen what men do for less. Jackson glanced toward the Suburban. The woman was insurance. Cardenas wasn't sure you'd stay to fight if you got away clean. Michael's mind worked furiously, calculating angles, distances, probability of success. Jackson knew his tactics. his tendencies. This would require something unexpected. So what happens now? Michael asked, buying time. You take me in for the bonus? That's the plan. Though Cardenas would accept your body as an alternative. Jackson gestured with his weapon. Move. Toward the road. Slow and easy. Michael complied. Hands raised slightly. Steps deliberate. You realize he'll kill you too. Eventually. Jackson shrugged. Maybe. But I'll be 3 million richer and retired somewhere warm first. As they neared the edge of the forest, Michael stumbled slightly. Jackson tensed but didn't fire. A gunshot would still compromise their position. Keep moving, he hissed. Michael straightened, now holding something small in his left hand. Remember Kandahar? He asked quietly. Recognition flashed in Jackson's eyes, too late. The small flashbang grenade detonated between them, momentarily blinding and deafening both men. But Michael had been prepared, closing his eyes and turning away at the critical moment. He launched himself at Jackson, driving his combat knife up, under the body armor. Jackson's expression registered shock, then understanding. His mouth formed words Michael couldn't hear through their ringing in his ears. Should have taken the shot. Michael lowered his former friend to the ground. Yeah, he agreed softly. You should have. The commotion had alerted the guards. Voices shouted in Spanish. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness toward the forest edge. Michael dragged Jackson's body deeper into the trees, retrieving weapons and communication devices. The throat mic would be useful. It would allow him to monitor the cartel's communications now that he had Jackson's receiver. He activated it immediately. Heard something near the western perimeter. A voice reported in accented English. Team 2 investigating. Find out what it was, came the reply, a voice of authority. Cardenas himself. And where the hell is Jackson? He should have reported in by now. No contact, sir. Then find him, and bring the woman to my position. If Reeves is still out there, let's make sure he can see what's at stake. Michael's jaw tightened. The situation had deteriorated dramatically. His ally was now revealed as a traitor. The cartel forces were alert and mobilizing. And worst of all, they had Sarah. The mission parameters had changed. This was no longer about survival or capture. This was a rescue operation with a civilian hostage in play. He checked his equipment. Limited ammunition. No backup. 15 heavily armed hostiles between him and Sarah. And 3 hours until dawn. In the distance, he could see cartel operatives moving Sarah from the vehicle. Even from this distance, he could tell she was fighting them, making their job difficult. Pride mingled with fear in his chest. Cardenas was using her as bait, positioning her where Michael would have to expose himself to reach her. The cartel leader was expecting desperation, a frontal assault driven by emotion rather than tactics. Michael would need to disappoint him. He retreated deeper into the forest, circling around to approach from an unexpected angle. As he moved, he triggered the remote detonators he'd planted earlier, not to kill, but to create chaos and confusion. Small explosions erupted across the property, drawing attention and resources away from Sarah's position. The night lit up with muzzle flashes as cartel soldiers fired blindly into the darkness. Michael smiled grimly. They were revealing their positions, wasting ammunition, losing discipline. Exactly as he'd planned. Now the real hunt would begin. The first cartel soldier died silently. Michael's garrote wire cutting off both sound and air. He lowered the body carefully, stripping the man of his radio and ammunition, before moving on. 1 down, 14 to go. Michael had abandoned subtlety for efficiency. Each minute that passed was another minute Sarah remained in danger. He'd shifted fully into offensive mode. The deadly operative known as Reaper emerging from dormancy. Through Jackson's commandeered earpiece, he could track the cartel's movements. They'd established a central command post near the logging road. Sarah was being held there, guarded by 2 men, while the others continued searching the property. Team 3, report, came Cardenas's voice through the comm. Silence. Team 3, acknowledge. More silence. Send Rodriguez to check their position, Cardenas ordered, tension evident in his voice. Michael smiled grimly. Team 3 no longer existed. He'd eliminated all 3 members over the past 40 minutes, using their own patrol pattern against them. Now he was working on Team 2. He moved like a shadow through the forest, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. This was the environment where he excelled. Chaos, darkness, fear. The cartel soldiers were trained, but he was something else entirely. The product of 2 decades spent perfecting the art of clandestine killing. Another soldier appeared in his night vision, scanning the trees nervously. The man's breathing was rapid, shallow. He'd heard what happened to his comrades. He knew something was hunting them. Michael waited until the man turned away, then struck. A swift combat knife to the kidney, a hand over the mouth to muffle the scream. Another body lowered gently to the forest floor. Teams 1 and 2, fall back to command post, Cardenas suddenly ordered. Defensive perimeter, now. They were consolidating. Forces. Good. That would make the next phase easier. Michael reached an elevated position overlooking the command post. Through his scope, he could see Cardenas pacing, gesturing angrily, as his remaining men formed a protective circle around the position. Sarah sat on the ground nearby, hands bound before her, a guard standing over her with a rifle. 8 men left, plus Cardenas himself. The odds were improving, but a frontal assault would still be suicide. He needed to thin their numbers further. He unscrewed the suppressor from his rifle. His next shot wouldn't be silent. Michael aimed carefully, then fired at a fuel canister, positioned near one of the cartel vehicles. The explosion ripped through the night, sending flames shooting skyward. 2 soldiers were caught in the blast, thrown through the air like ragdolls. In the chaos that followed, Michael fired 3 more shots in rapid succession. Each found its mark. 3 more bodies hit the ground. Return fire! Return fire! Cardenas was shouting, his composure cracking. Bullets sprayed the forest randomly, nowhere near Michael's actual position. He'd already moved, circling silently to approach from another angle. Through his scope, he saw Cardenas grab Sarah, using her as a shield as he retreated toward the remaining SUV. The surviving cartel members provided covering fire, backing toward the vehicle with practiced discipline. They were evacuating, taking Sarah with them. Michael couldn't allow that to happen. Once they got her off his property, the advantage would shift dramatically. He triggered his final set of explosives, the charges he'd planted along the logging road earlier that day. The ground shook as sequential blasts tore through the earth, cutting off the cartel's escape route with fallen trees and debris. Through his scope, Michael could see Cardenas's face contorted with rage. The cartel leader shouted something at Heisman, gesturing wildly toward the forest. Then he pressed a pistol to Sarah's head. "Reeves!" Cardenas shouted into the night. "I know you can hear me. Show yourself now, or I put a bullet in her brain." Michael froze, calculating options rapidly. Cardenas was too well protected by his remaining men for a clean shot. 10 seconds, Reeves. 10, 9. Sarah's eyes scanned the darkness, showing no fear despite the gun at her temple. Her expression held something else. Determination, trust, a silent communication meant for Michael alone. 8, 7. She was telling him something. Michael, focused on her face, reading her subtle movements. She was going to do something. Something soon. 6, 5. Sarah's muscles tensed slightly. 4. Michael adjusted his aim, preparing for whatever opportunity she might create. 3. With a sudden, violent movement, Sarah slammed her head backward into Cardenas's face. The cartel leader stumbled, cursing in Spanish, the gun momentarily, wavering away from her head. Michael took the shot. The bullet missed Cardenas by inches, striking the guard beside him instead. In the split second of confusion, Sarah broke free, diving toward the ground as Michael fired again and again, forcing the cartel members to scatter for cover. "Move! Move! Move!" Michael shouted through his comm unit, knowing the cartel would hear it through their fallen comrades' radios. He wanted them disoriented, believing multiple attackers were converging. In the chaos, Sarah crawled behind one of the vehicles, disappearing from Cardenas's reach. Michael used the distraction to advance closer, eliminating another guard with a precise shot to the head. 4 left, including Cardenas. "Find her!" the cartel leader screamed, blood streaming from his nose where Sarah had struck him. "Find her now!" The remaining guards spread out, searching frantically around the vehicles and nearby trees. Michael tracked their movements, waiting for the right moment to strike again. His earpiece crackled. A new voice, familiar, unexpected. "Reaper, this is Sidewinder. We have eyes on your position. Friendly units approaching from the north. Confirm. Status." Mercer had sent backup after all. But they were still minutes away, and Sarah was exposed in the middle of a firefight. "Negative, Sidewinder," Michael replied quietly. "Hostage situation in progress. Maintain distance until my signal." "Copy. That, Reaper. Asset standing by." Michael advanced closer, using the darkness as cover. He could see Sarah now, hidden behind the rear tire of the SUV. She'd managed to work her bound hands in front of her body, giving her more mobility. Their eyes met briefly across the clearing. He nodded once. She understood. Dawn was breaking over. The mountains. The first pale light revealing the carnage scattered across Michael's property. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Vehicles burned, sending columns of black smoke into the morning sky. Cardenas stood in the center of it all, frantically shouting orders to his 3 remaining men as they tried to establish a defensive position around the SUVs. Their disciplined professionalism had crumbled, replaced by the panicked movements of men who knew they were being hunted. "He's just one man," Cardenas raged, waving his pistol. "Find him and kill him." But Michael wasn't just one man. He was a precision weapon forged through years of black operations. A ghost who moved between shadows and struck without warning. And now, he was angry. He circled to the eastern edge of the clearing, where the rising sun would be at his back, blinding anyone who tried to spot him. The cartel soldiers were jumpy, firing at sounds, wasting ammunition. Every shot revealed their position more clearly. An explosion rocked one of the remaining vehicles, Michael's final remote charge detonating beneath the gas tank. As the men scattered from the flames, Michael took his shot, eliminating one more. "Guard! 2 left, plus Cardenas." "Reeves!" the cartel leader shouted, desperation in his voice. "Let's talk. This can still end without more bloodshed." Michael remained silent, moving to a new position. Through his scope, he tracked the remaining guards as they took positions around Cardenas, scanning the forest edge frantically. "I have money. More than you can imagine," Cardenas continued. "We can make a deal." As he spoke, one of the guards spotted movement, Sarah, attempting to crawl to better cover. He swung his rifle toward her. Michael fired instantly. The guard collapsed. 1 guard left, and Cardenas, the cartel leader, grabbed the duffel bag at his feet, the one containing whatever was valuable enough to bring him personally to this operation. He shoved it at his remaining guard. "Find the woman! Use her to get us out of here!" The guard hesitated, clearly terrified of exposing himself. "Now!" Cardenas screamed, shoving him forward. It was the opening Michael needed. As the guard moved, reluctantly towards Sarah's last known position, Mikkel emerged from cover at the opposite edge of the clearing. 1 shot dropped the final guard. Before Cardenas could react, Michael was on him, weapon trained center mass. "Don't move," Michael said quietly. Cardenas froze, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Reeves, on your knees, hands behind your head." The cartel leader complied slowly, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. "You know I have resources beyond what you see here. Men who will hunt you to the ends of the earth. They can try." Michael kicked the duffel bag open with 1 foot, revealing stacks of cash and several kilo bricks of cocaine. "Evidence, just as expected. You think this ends with my capture?" Cardenas laughed bitterly. "This isn't a movie, American. There is no happy ending here." Michael heard movement behind him, Sarah approaching cautiously, her face dirty and streaked with tears, but her eyes blazing with determination. "Are you okay?" he asked, without taking his eyes off Cardenas. "I'll live," she replied, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. "Is it over?" Before Michael could answer, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. The cavalry had arrived, Mercer's team, coming to secure Cardenas and the evidence. "Almost," Michael said, allowing himself the first breath of relief since this had all begun. Cardenas's eyes narrowed, calculating even in defeat. "What happens? Now, Reeves, you hand me over to your government. They put me in some black site prison. You think that protects you or her? I think you should worry more about yourself right now." The cartel leader smiled thinly. "Your government wants me alive. That gives me leverage. With them, maybe." Michael's voice dropped lower. "Not with me." Something in his tone made Cardenas's smile fade. The helicopter appeared over the tree line, the downdraft whipping debris across the clearing as it prepared to land. Michael could see tactical operators rappelling down, securing the perimeter. With professional efficiency, it was over. The mission was complete. Cardenas captured, evidence secured, Sarah safe. So why didn't it feel finished? Because it wasn't. Not while Cardenas lived to threaten them again. Not while the past remained unresolved. "Michael," Sarah touched his arm gently. "It's done. Let them handle it now." He looked at her, seeing the woman who had somehow breached the walls around his heart. The woman who had just witnessed the darkness he'd tried to keep hidden from her. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked quietly. "For bringing this to your door?" Her eyes softened. "There's nothing to forgive." The tactical team approached, weapons ready. Their leader nodded to Michael. "Sir, we'll take it from here." Michael hesitated, his weapon still trained on Cardenas. One trigger pull would end the threat permanently, one moment of violence to secure their future peace. The old Michael, Reaper, wouldn't have hesitated. "Michael," Sarah said again, her hand still on his arm. "Let's go home." Slowly, deliberately, Michael lowered his weapon and stepped back, allowing the tactical team to secure Cardenas. "It's over," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. But as Cardenas was led to the helicopter, the cartel leader looked back once, his eyes locking with Michael's. The message was clear. Nothing is ever truly over. 3 days had passed since the assault on Michael's property. The official story in local news described it as a drug bust gone wrong. A DEA operation that had resulted in multiple fatalities. No mention of a retired operative defending his home. No mention of Sarah's abduction. The government was already sanitizing the event, erasing the truth. Michael stood on his porch, surveying the damage. His carefully built sanctuary lay in ruins, buildings riddled with bullet holes, grounds scarred by explosions, blood soaked into the earth despite the cleanup crew's best efforts. He had survived, but his refuge was destroyed. They said, "We can't stay here," Sarah said, joining him on the porch. "Not until they've completed their investigation." She had refused medical evacuation, insisted on remaining with Michael through the debriefings and questioning. Her resilience continued to amaze him. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "This place is compromised now. We can't stay anyway." "We?" The question hung in the air between them. Before he could answer, a black SUV approached. Up the long driveway, government plates. Michael tensed instinctively, but relaxed when he recognized the driver. Mercer. His former handler stepped out of the vehicle, looking much older than Michael remembered. The years in federal service had taken their toll. "Reeves." He nodded in greeting, then turned to Sarah. "Ms. Quinn, good to see you recovering well." "Is it over?" Michael asked bluntly. Mercer gestured toward the cabin. "Let's talk inside." Once seated at Michael's kitchen table, Mercer opened his briefcase and removed a manila folder. "Cardenas is secure. Being held at a classified location, pending interrogation." He slid several photographs across thatable. "We also seized, approximately, 12 million in cash and 20 kilos of uncut cocaine. The money trail is leading back to connections in 3 state governments and a federal judge. So the operation was a success," Michael said flatly. "Beyond expectations." Mercer nodded. "Which brings me to your compensation." He removed another folder, thicker than the first. New identity. Jack Thorne. Birth certificate, driver's license, passport, credit history, all backstopped through federal databases. He laid the documents out one by one. A property in Colorado, remote enough for privacy, but not so isolated that it raises flags. And a bank account with $5 million, classified as payment for consulting services. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the amount, but she remained silent. "And Ms. Quinn's protection?" Michael asked. "Similar package if she wants it. New identity, new location, financial compensation for her troubles." Mercer glanced at Sarah. "We owe you a considerable debt as well." Sarah looked at Michael, a question in her eyes that he couldn't answer yet. "There's something else," Mercer continued, his expression growing more serious. "Something that wasn't in the official reports." He pulled out a final photograph and placed it before Michael. "Jackson's body, laid out in the morgue. Care to explain?" Mercer asked quietly. Michael met his handler's gaze steadily. "He betrayed me, sold me out to Cardenas. He's the one who compromised Sarah's location." Mercer's expression didn't change. "That's what I figured. Problem is, Jackson wasn't working alone." The statement hung in the air like a thundercloud. "What do you mean?" Michael asked, tension creeping back into his frame. "Jackson made 3 calls after delivering Ms. Quinn to the safe house. 1 to you, confirming delivery. 1 to a burner phone we haven't traced yet. And 1 to a number inside our agency." Michael's blood ran cold. "You have a mole, at least one." Mercer nodded grimly. "Someone high enough to know about your location and the safe house protocols. Which means these new identities might already be compromised," Michael concluded. "Possibly. We're working to identify the leak, but..." Mercer spread his hands helplessly. "This goes deeper than we initially thought." Sarah spoke up for the first time. "So, it's not over?" "I'm afraid not," Mercer confirmed. "Cardenas was just the visible part of the operation. There's someone else pulling strings from the shadows. Someone with access to classified information and government resources." "Who?" Michael demanded. "We don't know yet. But there's one lead." Mercer pulled out his phone, displaying a text message. This came from Jackson's phone shortly before his death. He sent it to the same unidentified burner number. The message read, "Package secured. Meeting. Ghost at extraction point. Will confirm delivery." "Ghost?" Michael frowned. "A code name we haven't been able to identify," Mercer explained. "But we have intel suggesting this ghost is arriving in Montana tonight. Private airstrip outside of Kalispell. And you want me to intercept," Michael surmised, understanding dawning. "Officially, no. This conversation never happened. The agency can't authorize an operation against an unknown target based on a text message." Mercer closed his briefcase. "Unofficially, this may be your only chance to truly end this." To ensure your safety, and Ms. Quinn's, I just finished fighting one war, Michael said quietly. You're asking me to start another. I'm giving you intelligence. What you do with it is your choice. Mercer stood, heading for the door. He paused, looking back at them. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. You deserved your peace, Reeves. After Mercer departed, silence filled the cabin. Sarah watched Michael's face, reading the conflict. There! You're going, aren't you? She finally asked. If I don't, we'll never be safe. He met her eyes. But I won't make that decision alone. Not anymore. Sarah took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Then we go together. Sarah. No. She cut him off. I'm not sitting in some safe house waiting to see if you come back. Not again. Whatever this is, we face it together. Michael knew that look. She wouldn't be dissuaded. Okay, he agreed reluctantly. But we do this my way, carefully. Sarah nodded. So what's the plan? Michael moved to the hidden compartment beneath his floorboards, retrieving weapons and equipment that had escaped the government's attention during their cleanup. We identify this ghost. We determine the threat level. And then? Sarah prompted. Michael checked the magazine on his pistol, his expression hardening into the cold mask of the operative he'd once been. And then we eliminate the threat. Permanently. Night had fallen by the time Michael and Sarah reached their observation point overlooking Kalispell's private airstrip. The small airport catered to wealthy tourists and businessmen visiting Montana's exclusive mountain retreats. Tonight, it would host something far more dangerous. That's the hangar Mercer identified, Michael whispered, indicating a structure at the far end of the runway. Private, owned by a shell corporation that traces back to a law firm in Delaware. Sarah nodded, peering through the binoculars he'd given her. There are 2 SUVs parked outside. Men with guns, 4 guards, professional stance, private security, not cartel thugs. Michael adjusted his position slightly, getting comfortable for the long surveillance. The plane is scheduled to land at 11:40 p.m. We wait. We observe. We identify this ghost figure. And then? Sarah asked. Depends who it is. Michael replied honestly. This could be cartel leadership, or it could be someone worse. Worse? A government official, a corrupt agent, someone with the power to make us disappear legally. Sarah absorbed this, her expression grim. So we're up against both criminals and potentially our own government. Welcome to my old life, Michael said with a humorless smile. They settled into silence, watching as more vehicles arrived at the hangar. Men in tactical gear unloaded equipment, establishing a security perimeter. This was no ordinary arrival. Michael, Sarah said quietly, after some time had passed. If we survive this, what happens to us? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, is there an us after this? Or do we take our new identities and go separate ways? Michael turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since the assault on his ranch. Despite everything she'd been through, her eyes remained clear, determined. This wasn't a woman seeking escape. This was a woman demanding truth. I want there to be an us, he said finally. But I need you to understand what that means. My past, it doesn't just go away. You've seen that now. I'm not asking for your past to disappear, she replied. I'm asking if I have a place in your future. Before he could answer, the distant sound of an approaching aircraft caught their attention. Right on schedule. This is it, Michael murmured, returning his focus to the hangar. Get ready. The sleek private jet touched down smoothly, taxiing toward the waiting hangar. Security personnel moved with practiced precision, forming a protective corridor from the aircraft to the lead SUV. Michael focused his night vision scope on the jet's door as it opened. A flight attendant appeared first, followed by 2 more security guards. And then, no, Michael breathed, disbelief coloring his voice. What is it? Sarah asked urgently. Who is it? Through his scope, Michael watched as a familiar figure descended. The airplane steps, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to authority. Director Robert Hammond, the head of his former agency, Michael's ultimate superior during his operational years. It's Hammond, he whispered. My old director. Is that good or bad? Sarah asked. I don't know. Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Hammond could be here investigating the leak Mercer mentioned. Or he could be the leak, Sarah finished for him. Michael nodded grimly. We need to get closer. Hear what's being said. They retreated from their observation post, circling through the woods, to approach the hangar from the blind side where security was lighter. Years of operational experience guided Michael's movements, with Sarah following his lead precisely. stepping where he stepped, freezing when he signaled. As they neared the building, voices became audible. Hammond was speaking to someone, a subordinate, based on the deferential tone of the responses. Unacceptable failure, Hammond was saying. Cardenas was supposed to eliminate Reeves, not get captured by him. Michael froze. Those words confirmed his worst suspicions. The operation was compromised from the start, sir, replied a younger voice. Reeves was prepared, and Jackson failed to neutralize him as planned. Jackson was a fool, Hammond dismissed. But his failure creates an opportunity. Cardenas will be transferred tomorrow night. That's our chance to eliminate both problems simultaneously. Michael tensed. Hammond wasn't just corrupt. He was planning to kill both Michael and Cardenas. To cover his tracks. What about the woman? Asked the subordinate. The neighbor. Collateral damage, Hammond replied coldly. Make it look like a tragic accident during transfer. Gas leak, vehicle malfunction. I don't care. Just make it clean. Sarah's hand found Michael's in the darkness, squeezing tightly. This was personal. Now, Hammond had just signed her death warrant without a moment's hesitation. We have confirmation that Reeves and the woman are still at the cabin, Hammond asked. Yes, sir. Under surveillance as ordered. Michael's blood ran cold. They'd been watched the entire time. Their presence here was likely already detected. As if confirming his fears, a radio crackled nearby. Security team, check the perimeter. Motion sensors picked up something on the east side. Time to go, Michael whispered urgently to Sarah. Now, they began to retreat, moving as silently as possible through the underbrush. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as security personnel began sweeping the area. Contact! Someone shouted. 2 figures, heading north! Gunfire erupted, bullets thudding into trees around them. Run! Michael urged, pulling Sarah along as they abandoned stealth for speed. They sprinted through the forest, dodging between trees as bullets continued to fly. Michael led them toward their hidden vehicle, weaving unpredictably to make targeting difficult. Behind them, engines roared to life. The SUVs were joining the pursuit. They're trying to cut us off, Michael realized, changing direction abruptly. This way, they veered east, toward rougher terrain where vehicles couldn't follow. But with each step, Michael knew the truth. They weren't escaping. They were simply buying time. Hammond had resources, manpower, and worst of all, legitimacy. He could deploy federal agencies, local police, even military assets with the right story. This wasn't an enemy Michael could simply outshoot or outmaneuver. As they crested a small ridge, momentarily hidden from their pursuers, Michael made a decision. We can't outrun them, he said, breathing hard. Not like this. What do we do? Sarah asked, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes still determined. Michael checked his weapons. We need to split up. No. Her refusal was immediate. We stick together. Sarah, listen to me. He gripped her shoulders. They're after me primarily. If we split up, I can draw them away, give you a chance to escape, to get to Mercer with what we've learned, and leave you to face them alone. Not happening. This isn't a debate, Michael insisted. Hammond wants us both dead. One of us needs to survive to expose him. Sarah stared at him, the realization dawning that he was right. But still, she hesitated. How will I find you again? She asked. Michael pressed his satellite phone into her hand. Mercer's direct line is programmed in. Tell him everything we heard. Tell him Hammond is the ghost. He'll know what to do. In the distance, voices shouted as their pursuers regrouped. Go, Michael urged. I'll lead them west. You head east, find the road. There's a gas station 5 miles down. Call from there. Sarah gripped the front of his jacket, pulling him into a fierce kiss. Don't you dare die, she whispered against his lips. I'll find you, he promised. Now go. With one last lingering look, Sarah turned and disappeared into the darkness. Michael watched until he could no longer see her, then turned in the opposite direction. He fired 2 shots into the air, ensuring their pursuers would focus on him. Come on, you bastards, he muttered, checking his ammunition one last time. Let's finish this. The forest had become a war zone. Flashlights swept through the darkness as Hammond's men spread out in pursuit, their communication channels alive with tactical updates. Michael moved between shadows, using every trick he'd learned in 2 decades of covert operations to stay just ahead of them. He wasn't running to escape. He was drawing them away from Sarah and setting a trap. A lifetime ago, Michael had specialized in turning hunters into prey. Now, those dormant skills resurfaced with lethal clarity. He circled back toward the hangar, using his pursuers' focus on the forest to slip past their perimeter. The real target wasn't the foot soldiers. It was Hammond. The director would be inside, coordinating the search. believing himself safely removed from danger. That assumption would cost him everything. Michael approached the hangar from the blind side, noting with professional approval the security measures in place. Motion sensors, cameras, armed guards. Formidable for civilians, inadequate for him. He located the electrical junction box serving the building and disabled it with practiced efficiency. Inside the hangar, lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows across the concrete floor. "Report," came Hammond's voice from inside, sharp with irritation. "What happened to the power?" "Checking, sir," responded a security officer, moving toward the exit. Michael waited in perfect stillness as the man emerged, weapon drawn. A quick strike to the throat, another to the temple, and the guard collapsed without a sound. Michael stripped him of his radio and tactical gear, then dragged the unconscious body into the shadows. "Jensen, report," crackled the radio. "What's your status on the power?" Michael clicked the radio twice. The universal signal for, "All clear, need a minute." Inside the hangar, Hammond paced impatiently before a makeshift command center. Satellite, phones, laptops, maps spread across folding tables. The full apparatus of a covert operation. "Sir," said his aide, "we've lost contact with Team 2 in the northwest sector." Hammond's eyes narrowed. "Reeves," he muttered. "He's not running, he's hunting. Should we pull our men back to secure your position?" Hammond considered this, then shook his head. "No. Double the perimeter guards, but keep the search teams moving. He's 1 man against 12. The odds favor us." The aide nodded and stepped away to relay the orders. Hammond turned back to the maps, studying the terrain with the focus of a man who'd orchestrated countless operations from behind a desk. That was his fatal flaw, Michael reflected as he watched through a side window. Hammond understood strategy, but had forgotten what it meant to be the weapon itself. Michael circled to the rear of the hangar, where a single guard maintained position. The man was professional, alert, distance indicating proper training, but he was expecting threats to come from outside the perimeter, not from within it. A mistake. Michael approached silently from behind, using the shadows cast by the emergency lighting. One fluid movement, arm around the throat, cutting off both sound and oxygen, and another guard was incapacitated. 4 down. 8 remained, plus Hammond and his aide. Inside, Hammond tensed suddenly, some sixth sense warning him that something had changed. "Call in the perimeter guards," he ordered. "I want visual confirmation of each position." Too late. Michael was already inside, moving between stacked crates toward the command center. The radio crackled. "East position, report." Silence. "North position, report." More silence. Hammond's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "We've been penetrated," he announced calmly. "Secure this position. Now." The remaining guards moved with practiced efficiency, forming a protective circle around Hammond. Weapons ready, eyes scanning the shadowy hangar interior. "I know you're in here, Reeves," Hammond called out, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "You're good, always were the best we had, but you're outnumbered and outgunned." Michael didn't respond. Words were weapons only when silence served no purpose. "Think about your next move carefully," Hammond continued. "Your girlfriend is still out there. My men will find her eventually, but there's another option." A metal container shifted slightly, in the far corner. Every guard turned, weapons training on the sound. "We can deal," Hammond offered. "You walk away, disappear for real this time. I'll call off the hunt. The woman lives. Everyone gets what they want." Another sound, from the opposite direction. 2 guards peeled off to investigate. Hammond's smile was cold. "Trying to split my forces? Amateur move, Reeves. I expected better." A flashbang grenade rolled into the center of the command post. Hammond's eyes widened in the split second before detonation. The explosion of light and sound disoriented the guards, sending them staggering. Michael emerged from his hiding place, moving with lethal precision. 2 guards down before they could recover. A third managed to fire wildly before Michael's combat knife found its mark. When the chaos settled, only Hammond remained, blood trickling from his ears, his aide unconscious beside him. "Hello, Director," Michael said quietly, weapon trained on. Hammond straightened, adjusting his jacket with the dignity of a man who'd always considered himself above the dirty work of his agency. "Reeves. Impressive as always." "Why?" Michael asked. The single word contained volumes. "Business," Hammond shrugged. "Cardenas offered access to distribution networks across 3 continents. Do you have any idea how much intelligence that's worth? How many operations we could run using his infrastructure? You sold out your country for operational advantage. Hammond's laugh was bitter. Don't be naive. I advanced our interests while securing my future. The agency pays a government pension. Cardenas pays in millions. And the collateral damage? The civilians caught in your private war. Necessary sacrifices. Hammond's eyes hardened. Including your neighbor. I admit, using her as leverage was effective. You never showed such vulnerability during your active years. Michael's finger tightened on the trigger. Give me one reason why I shouldn't end this right now. Because dead men can't testify, came a voice from behind them. Michael didn't turn. He'd recognized the footsteps moments before. Mercer, he acknowledged. Right on time, Mercer stepped into view, his own weapon trained on Hammond. Sarah reached me. Told me everything. He glanced at Michael. You knew I'd track her satellite. Phone! I counted on it. Hammond's composed facade cracked slightly. Daniel, think about what you're doing. This can still be contained, properly managed. Properly managed, Mercer repeated with disgust. Like the 12 operatives who died on your operations when you leaked their positions, or the civilian families targeted to maintain your cover. Collateral damage, Hammond said dismissively. This is bigger than individuals, Daniel. This is about power and control on a global scale. No, Michael contradicted quietly. This is about greed. Simple as that. Hammond's eyes narrowed. So what happens now? You turn me over to the authorities. There will be an investigation, certainly. Perhaps even a closed-door trial, but I have friends in places you can't imagine. The system protects its own. Not this time, Mercer said, producing a small recording device. Your confession is already being transmitted to secure servers, copies sent to 3 federal judges, and the Attorney General. Hammond's composure finally shattered. You're both dead men. Cardenas will ensure— Cardenas is already talking, Mercer cut him off, offering everything he knows in exchange for consideration, including detailed records of your partnership. For the first time, real fear flashed in Hammond's eyes. You're lying. The cartel doesn't tolerate failure, Michael said, and you failed them spectacularly when you couldn't eliminate me. Desperation replaced Hammond's calculated confidence. His hand moved suddenly toward his jacket. Both Michael and Mercer fired simultaneously. Hammond collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. Damn it, Mercer muttered, kneeling to check for a pulse. He's gone. Michael lowered his weapon slowly. Maybe it's better this way. Cleaner. No. Mercer disagreed sharply. We needed him alive. His testimony wouldn't have mattered, Michael finished. He was right about one thing. The system protects its own. This way, he becomes the sole conspirator. The agency can disavow him, claim he was acting alone. Mercer looked at him strangely. When did you get so political? When I realized there are some enemies you can't simply eliminate. Michael holstered his weapon. Where's Sarah? Safe house in Whitefish, secured by people I personally vetted. Mercer glanced at the destruction surrounding them. This is going to be a nightmare to clean up. Not my problem anymore, Michael said, already moving toward the exit. Your deals still stand. New identities, new location. Mercer nodded. With Hammond exposed, it's even more secure. His entire network will be dismantled. Then we're done here. Reeves, Mercer called after him. What will you do now? Michael paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. Live, he said simply. For the first time in 20 years, just live. Outside, dawn was breaking. Over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Michael stood for a moment, breathing in the clean Montana air. The weight of decades seemed to lift from his shoulders with each exhale. Hammond was gone, the cartel threat neutralized. His past, if not erased, at least resolved. For the first time since he'd entered the shadows of covert operations, Michael Reeves could see a future in the light, a future with Sarah, somewhere far from here, a future where monsters existed only, in memory, not in the darkness. Outside his door, he started walking toward Whitefish, toward Sarah, each step carrying him further from the man he had been, and closer to the man he might become. Behind him, smoke began to rise from the hangar as Mercer's cleanup team did their work, erasing all evidence of what had transpired. By nightfall, nothing would remain but ashes and official denials. Some ghosts, Michael reflected, could actually be laid to rest. 6 weeks later, a small moving truck pulled up to a timber-framed house nestled against the foothills of Colorado's San Juan Mountains. The property was secluded without being isolated. 5 acres with mountain views, a rushing creek, and enough distance from neighbors to provide privacy without raising suspicions. Michael stepped out of the passenger side, surveying their new home with a critical eye. old habits, assessing sightlines, potential vulnerabilities, escape routes. You're doing it again, Sarah said as she joined him, threading her arm through his. Doing what? Scanning for threats. She squeezed his arm gently. We're safe here, Jack. Jack Thorne. His new identity still felt strange, an ill-fitting suit he hadn't broken in yet. But Sarah, now Emily Thorne on paper, seemed to have embraced the change with remarkable adaptability. Old habits, he admitted, consciously relaxing his stance. The aftermath of Hammond's death had unfolded exactly as Michael had predicted. The agency disavowed all knowledge of the director's criminal activities, painting him as a rogue operator who'd abused his position for personal gain. Cardenas remained in custody, his testimony securing him a slightly less oppressive prison sentence, while exposing corruption across multiple government agencies. Michael and Sarah had spent a month in a secure location, while Mercer arranged their new identities and residence. During that time, they'd talked more deeply than ever before, about his past, her expectations, their shared future. I still have nightmares, she had confessed one night. Not about the kidnapping or the gunfire, about losing you. He had held her then, struggling to find words for feelings he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. I'm not going anywhere, he'd finally said. Simple words, but a profound promise from a man who'd spent his life moving through shadows. Now, as they stood before their new home, that promise felt more tangible than ever. Should we go inside? Sarah nudged him gently. The house was fully furnished. Another detail Mercer had arranged. Modern rustic design, comfortable without being ostentatious, large windows overlooking the mountains, though Michael had insisted on reinforced glass and state-of-the-art security systems. Some habits couldn't be broken, only managed. As they explored the space, Michael found himself drawn to a room at the back of the house, home office, according to the floor plan. But it had been converted into something different. A workshop, woodworking tools arranged with military precision. Raw materials stacked neatly against one wall. On the central workbench lay an envelope. Michael's name, his real name, written in Mercer's distinctive scrawl. What is it? Sarah asked, watching as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, nothing traceable. Reeves. Consider this, my retirement gift. Thought you might need something constructive to occupy those hands. Better to build than to destroy. Your old life is officially over. Hammond's network has been dismantled. The few who knew your true identity have been reassigned or retired. Even I won't know your location after this message is delivered. The woman deserves peace. So do you, though you'll never believe it. Plant trees, build furniture, grow old. The shadows can find someone else to dwell in them. MPS. Check the safe behind the Martin Sexton print in the living room. Insurance just in case. Let's hope you never need it. Michael refolded the letter carefully. A goodbye, he said simply. Sarah nodded, understanding, without needing details. Will you miss it? The work, the purpose, he considered the question. Seriously, respect for her warranting nothing less than complete honesty. Parts of it, he admitted. The clarity, the certainty, knowing exactly who the enemy was and what needed to be done. And now, everything is undefined. Civilian life doesn't come with mission parameters or extraction plans. Sarah smiled, a hint of mischief lightening her expression. Sounds terrifying for a man of your particular skill set. Terrifying, he agreed, returning her smile with a small one of his own, but not unwelcome. They continued exploring the house, discovering thoughtful details in every room. The kitchen with its professional-grade equipment. Sarah had mentioned her love of cooking during their debriefings. The library filled with first editions of Michael's favourite authors, preferences gleaned from his personnel file. A sunroom, perfect for Sarah's long-abandoned hobby of painting. They were thorough, she observed. Mercer's good at his job. Michael paused, correcting himself. Was good at his job. I suspect he's joining us in retirement after this. In the living room, Michael located the Martin Sexton print, a mountain landscape that reminded him of his Montana property. Behind it, as promised, was a wall safe with a biometric lock calibrated to his fingerprint. Inside lay a small arsenal. 2 handguns, a sniper rifle broken down into component parts, ammunition, cash in 3 currencies, and passports for identities even. Mercer wasn't supposed to know about Michael's personal contingency plan, recreated with impressive attention to detail. Just in case, Sarah said, reading his thoughts. Just in case, he agreed, closing the safe and replacing the artwork. But with luck, it stays closed. That evening, they sat on the back deck with glasses of whiskey, watching as alpenglow painted the mountains in watercolor hues of pink and gold. The scent of pine filled the cooling air. Somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled its autumn challenge. "So," Sarah said after a comfortable silence, "what does Jack Thorne do for a living? We should probably establish our cover story before meeting the neighbors." Michael considered this. His new documentation listed him as a security consultant, close enough to reality to maintain, without requiring extensive fabrication. Security evaluation for corporate clients, he suggested. Mostly remote work with occasional travel for on-site assessments. And Emily, wildlife veterinarian transitioning to research, working on a book about large predator conservation. She smiled approvingly. "You've given this some thought. Details matter in creating a convincing identity." Sarah set down her glass and turned to face him fully. "And what about us? What's our story? How did security consultant Jack meet veterinarian Emily?" Their cover story was already established in their documentation. Met at a conservation fundraiser. In Denver, married after a whirlwind romance. But Michael understood she was asking a different question. "We found each other," he said simply. "Against impossible odds and our own defensive instincts. We survived together, and now we're building something new." Sarah leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I like that story. It has potential," he agreed, arm wrapping around her. As darkness settled over the mountains, Michael felt something unfamiliar expanding in his chest, something that might, with practice, become contentment. The shadows that had defined his existence for so long seemed to recede just slightly, making space for something brighter. Not peace, perhaps, not yet, but the possibility of it, the foundation upon which it might be built. For a man who had spent his life in war, it was more than he had ever expected to find. 1 year later, Michael stood at the edge of their property, hands rough from honest work, watching as the afternoon sun gilded the mountains. Behind him, a small stand of pine saplings, 78 of them, caught the light, needles glowing emerald against the darkening sky. He'd planted one each day since they'd arrived, continuing the ritual he'd begun in Montana, not as penance anymore, but as affirmation, life continuing, growth possible, even after violence. The sound of tires on gravel drew his attention. Sarah's SUV appeared around the bend, returning from her weekly trip to town for supplies. He walked to meet her, tension he hadn't consciously acknowledged easing from his shoulders at the sight of her. Some habits remained, the need to account for her safety, the constant awareness of potential threats, but the hypervigilance had softened from a jagged edge to a worn stone. Still present, but no longer cutting. "You've been busy," Sarah observed as she stepped from the vehicle, nodding toward the newest sapling. "Finished the Hendersons' dining table too," he added, helping her with the grocery bags. The elderly couple from down the valley had become unexpected friends, commissioning woodwork from Michael after seeing the pieces he'd created for their own home. Small connections, normal life infiltrating their protective isolation bit by bit. Inside, Sarah unpacked the groceries while Michael prepared coffee. The domesticity of the scene still occasionally struck him as surreal. The world's deadliest operative measuring coffee beans and warming milk. "I ran into Sheriff Davis in town," Sarah mentioned casually. "He invited us to the department barbecue. Next weekend." Michael nodded, considering. Their carefully constructed cover identities had held solid. In the small mountain community, they were simply the private but pleasant couple from out east. He with his woodworking, she with her wildlife research. Their tendencies toward caution were attributed to city folks adjusting to country living. "We could make an appearance," he allowed. Integration without intimacy, the balance they'd struck with the community. Sarah placed a small envelope on the counter. This came to the post office box. Michael tensed immediately. Nobody had that address except Mercer, and he'd promised no contact. Approaching cautiously, he examined the envelope without touching it. No return address. Postmark from Washington, D.C. He opened it carefully, using a knife from the block. Inside, a newspaper clipping. Nothing else. The headline read, "Former intelligence director's death ruled suicide." The article detailed how the investigation into Robert Hammond's corrupt activities had concluded, with officials determining he had acted alone, motivated by financial gain. His death during an attempted arrest was now officially classified as suicide by cop, the final act of a desperate man unwilling to face justice. The agency had completed its cover-up, just as Michael had predicted. "Is it over?" Sarah asked quietly, reading the article over his shoulder. "It was over the moment Hammond died," Michael replied. "This is just the official seal on the tomb." He placed the clipping in the sink and lit it with a match, watching as it curled and blackened into ash. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Later, they sat on the deck with glasses of wine, a habit formed during their first evening in this house and maintained through changing seasons. The ritual created continuity, something Michael had rarely experienced in his operational life. "I spoke with Dr. Lieberman today," Sarah said, after a comfortable silence. "The Wildlife Conservation Project wants to publish my research on mountain lion territories. Congratulations." Michael's pride was genuine. She had transformed her veterinary background into legitimate research, tracking and documenting the predators that roamed the mountains around their home. "It means more visibility," she cautioned. "My name, Emily Thorne, in academic publications." "It's been a year," Michael reminded her. "No flags, no suspicious activity. The identity is solid." She studied him in the fading light. "You're really not worried anymore?" He considered the question carefully. "Not worried, aware. There's a difference." The distinction was important. Worry was paralyzing, rooted in fear. Awareness was a tool, honed through experience. He would always be aware of sightlines and exit routes, of strangers' body language, of potential threats. But the crippling vigilance that had defined his first months of retirement had gradually subsided. "I had the dream again last night," he admitted, after another silence. Sarah didn't need to ask which dream. The same one had haunted him since their arrival. He back in the forest, hunting Hammond's men. Except in the dream, he never reached Sarah in time, always one step behind, finding only evidence of what he'd lost. But it was different this time, he continued. "I found you. At the end. Waiting." She reached for his hand, fingers interlacing with his. Progress, a simple word for a profound truth. They were both healing, gradually and imperfectly. Sarah from the trauma of abduction and violence. Michael from a lifetime spent in shadows. "I've been thinking," he said, turning to face her fully, "about our story, our cover story." "No, our real story." He gestured toward the saplings catching the day's last light. "I've been planting trees for the lives I've taken. Maybe it's time to plant something for the life we're building." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "What did you have in mind?" Michael reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden box he'd crafted in his workshop. Inside nested a ring. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, but elegant in its simplicity. A band of polished wood, inlaid with a thin circle of gold. "We're already Jack and Emily Thorne on paper," he said quietly, "but I'd like it to be real. If you would." Sarah's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Are you asking me to marry you, former ghost of America's darkest operations?" A smile, rare but increasingly frequent, tugged at his lips. "I believe I am, Dr. Thorne." She took the ring, sliding it onto her finger with deliberate slowness. "Then yes. Absolutely yes." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Michael felt something settle within him. Not the hyper-aware calm of an operative awaiting deployment. Not the vigilant tension of a man expecting attack. Peace, imperfect and hard-won, but genuine. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound echoing across the valley. Life continuing, wild and untamed, but following its natural course. Their lives too, despite all odds, finding their proper rhythm. "I used to think retirement was just another word for waiting to die," Michael said, his arm around Sarah as they watched darkness claim the mountains. "I was wrong." "What is it then?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. Michael considered the scars on his hands, the saplings on the hillside, the ring on her finger, and the home they'd built from ashes and endings. "A beginning," he said simply. "Just a different kind of beginning." The night deepened around them, but neither moved to go inside. Some moments deserved to be lived fully, without rush or reservation. This was one of them. The moment when Michael, Reeves, once known as Reaper, acknowledged that he had finally, truly escaped what he had become. Not through death or violence, as he had once expected, but through the most dangerous,